Hi Guy, tonight we descend into the heart of a Hoseon farmer's market at dusk in old Chungcheong, where the scent of gingered kimchi hangs sweeter than any perfume. You trudge through the muddy aisles, dodging stray chickens and overripe persimmons under a sky bruised purple and orange. Historians still argue whether vendors accepted Bitcoin. You probably won't survive this unless you invest in some serious mosquito repellent, or maybe just hallucinate your way out using ancient herbal remedies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, if you will, the sun sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of apricot and deep violet. The air, still thick with the day's heat, begins to cool, carrying with it a symphony of sounds. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the boisterous laughter spilling from a nearby tavern, the insistent chirping of crickets tuning up for their evening concert. But the most captivating sound, the one that draws you closer, is the vibrant hum of the Chungcheong Twilight Market. This isn't your sterile, fluorescent-lit supermarket. This is a living, breathing organism. A chaotic tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells that assaults your senses in the best possible way. Dust devils dance in the fading light, kicking up the scent of dried fish and freshly tilled earth. Vendors hawk their wares with voices hoarse from a day of bartering, their calls echoing through the gathering dusk. Lanterns flicker to life, casting long, dancing shadows that stretch and distort the scene into something almost magical. Chungcheong, you see, was renowned for its agricultural abundance during the Joseon era. Think of it as the breadbasket of the kingdom, a fertile crescent nestled between mountains and sea. This strategic location drew merchants from all corners of the land, even from the distant capital of Hanyang, all eager to trade for Chungcheong's bounty. Rice, of course, was the staple, but imagine mountains of gleaming eggplants, plump pumpkins spilling from overflowing baskets, strings of crimson peppers drying in the last rays of the sun. And then there were the rarer delicacies. Ginseng roots gnarled like tiny, wise old men, bundles of fragrant mountain herbs whispered to have medicinal properties, and shimmering dried fish, their scales catching the lantern light like scattered jewels. Now, navigating this bustling marketplace wasn't for the faint of heart. It demanded a certain level of street smarts, a willingness to engage in some good-natured haggling, and perhaps a touch of theatrics. Because, let me tell you, the vendors of Chungcheong were masters of their craft. They possessed a secret language, a cryptic code of hand gestures and slang that could make or break a deal. Imagine trying to decipher their rapid-fire sign language, a whirlwind of flicking fingers and subtle nods, all while trying to secure the best price for that prized bundle of spinach. It was a performance, a delicate dance of wit and cunning, and woe betide the outsider who dared to enter the fray unprepared. Which brings us to the spinach. Ah, the humble spinach, the unlikely source of so much drama. You see, stories abound. Some say legends. Others insist on historical accuracy, of epic market brawls erupting over the last bundle of spinach at the end of the day. Were these clashes of greens truly a common occurrence, a form of nightly entertainment for the market-goers? Or were they merely embellished tales, exaggerated over generations of storytelling, adding a touch of spice to the already vibrant narrative of Chungcheong's Twilight Market? The debate rages on amongst historians, with passionate arguments on both sides. Some point to the inherent competitiveness of the marketplace, the pressure to secure the best goods for oneself and one's family. Others suggest that such tales are merely romanticized glimpses into a bygone era, a way to add a dash of intrigue to the mundane realities of daily life. Two determined housewives, their eyes locked on the prize. A vibrant, verdant bundle of spinach, the last of its kind. The tension is palpable. Suddenly, a hand darts out, grasping the coveted greens. A gasp ripples through the crowd. Words are exchanged, voices rising in pitch. And then, chaos. A flurry of skirts and flailing arms, a whirlwind of indignant shouts and accusations. The spinach, forgotten in the fray, lies trampled beneath their feet. Was this a common sight, a regular spectacle to spice up the evening's shopping, or simply a colorful anecdote passed down through generations? We may never know for sure, but one thing is certain. The Chongqing Twilight Market was a place of vibrant life, a melting pot of commerce and culture, where the mundane met the magical under a sky painted with the colors of dusk. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost, where friendships were forged and rivalries ignited, all against the backdrop of the setting sun and the intoxicating aroma of gingered kimchi. So next time you're strolling through your local supermarket, take a moment to imagine the sights, sounds, and smells of Chongqing's Twilight Market. And remember, always be prepared to haggle for that last bundle of spinach. You never know what kind of adventure it might spark. The scent of roasting chestnuts and sizzling street food battled with the sweeter perfume of plum blossoms carried on the breeze. My steps slowed, then stalled completely before Huang Yun's stall, my gaze snagged by the intricate dance of light and shadow across his jade carvings. Nephrite, the color of spring leaves and summer skies, transformed in his hands. Dragons, miniature yet potent, coiled and unfurled, their scales catching the last glints of the setting sun. One, no larger than my thumb, held a pearl in its tiny claw, the pearl seeming to glow with an inner luminescence. Huang Yun, a man carved from the same hard material as his art, barely looked up from his work. His tools, fine as needles, whispered against the stone. I wondered if he ever slept, if his dreams were filled with the cool, smooth touch of jade. I'd heard whispers, rumors really, that some Joseon jade, imbued with the mountain spirit, glowed faintly in the dark. Was this one such piece? I longed to ask, but Huang Yun seemed encased in a silent world of his own making. Beside the stall, a giant pine, freshly felled, leaned against a heavily laden cart. Its scent, sharp and sweet, a mixture of resin and something akin to regret, filled the air. The trunk, thick as a man's torso, still wept sticky sap. I imagined this magnificent tree standing tall on a mountainside, a silent witness to generations, now destined to become a beam in some grand palace. Pine, so strong and resilient, was indeed highly prized during the Joseon dynasty. Royal palaces and temples, symbols of permanence and power, were often constructed with its fragrant wood. I wondered if this particular pine, in its new life supporting a palace roof, would remember the wind rustling through its needles, the birds nesting in its branches. I picked up a small carving, a stylized lotus flower. Its petals, smooth and cool beneath my fingertips, seemed to hum with a subtle energy. I turned it over, examining it closely. Was there a secret symbol hidden within its curves, visible only under the moonlight, or perhaps, as some claimed, under the influence of certain herbal teas? The thought was intriguing. Imagine messages hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed to the initiated. What secrets might these jade carvings hold? Tales of forbidden love? Plots against the court? Or, perhaps, simply the carver's signature, a whisper of his identity etched into the stone. I glanced at the other patrons browsing Huang Yun's wares. A wealthy merchant, his silk robes whispering against the rough wood of the stall, held a hefty jade pendant depicting a snarling tiger. Beside him, a young scholar, his ink-stained fingers nervously tracing the outline of a delicate crane carving. And further down, a group of giggling court ladies, their faces hidden behind painted fans, debated the merits of various hair ornaments. Their conversation drifted towards me, snippets of words like rank and propriety reaching my ears. It reminded me of a debate that often simmered beneath the surface of courtly life. Did the size of one's jade ornament truly indicate social rank? Was the merchant's ostentatious tiger a blatant display of his wealth and status? Or was it, perhaps, compensating for some other, less visible shortcoming? The thought amused me. Were these elaborate displays of jade merely elaborate distractions, shiny baubles meant to divert attention from something lacking within? The scholar, clutching his crane, seemed to shrink under the merchant's booming laughter. His jade piece, small and unassuming, spoke of quiet contemplation rather than worldly power. Was he truly of lower rank, or simply a man of more refined tastes? Perhaps true status wasn't measured in the size of one's jade ornament, but in the depth of one's character. The court ladies, with their tinkling laughter and fluttering fans, seemed to favor intricately carved butterflies and flowers. Were these delicate pieces a reflection of their femininity and grace, Or were they simply following the latest courtly fashion? I set the lotus flower back on its stand, a faint chime accompanying its return. Huang Yan finally looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. He seemed to see right through me, past the layers of courtly etiquette and polite smiles, to the questions swirling within. He didn't speak, but a slight nod acknowledged my presence. I offered a small bow in return, a silent acknowledgement of his artistry and the secrets held within his jade. The scent of pine, strong and persistent, pulled my attention back to the felled giant. The cart driver, a wiry man with sun-weathered skin, began to secure the tree trunk with thick ropes. The wood creaked in protest, a mournful sound that echoed the rustling of leaves I had only imagined. The pine, once a symbol of enduring strength, now lay bound and helpless, its fate sealed. Just like the jade, it was being transformed, its essence shaped by human hands. But unlike the jade, which gained new life in the form of intricate carvings, the pine was being stripped of its identity, reduced to a mere building material. And yet, even in its new form, it would continue to serve, supporting the weight of the palace, sheltering those within its walls. Perhaps there was a certain nobility in that, a quiet dignity in fulfilling one's purpose, even if that purpose was chosen by another. I turned away from the stall, the scent of pine and the cool touch of jade lingering in my memory, each a reminder of the constant cycle of transformation, of loss and renewal that shaped the world around me. The market buzzed with the last frantic energy of the day. Vendors hawked their wares, their voices hoarse from hours of calling out prices. The air, thick with the scent of roasting chestnuts and fermenting kimchi, shimmered with the dust kicked up by hurrying feet. Lanterns began to flicker to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the deepening twilight. Huang's stall, laden with intricately carved wooden trinkets, stood nestled between a noisy fishmonger and a woman selling vibrantly dyed silks. Then Kim Hye-gyong appeared. She moved with an unsettling grace, her silken hanbok the color of a raven's wing. Her eyes, sharp as chips of obsidian, scanned the wares with an intensity that made Huang shift uneasily. They held a depth that hinted at secrets held close, knowledge gleaned from shadowed corners of the palace. She stopped in front of Huang's stall, her gaze settling on a small, exquisitely carved jade cicada perched on a branch of delicately rendered pine. Her long, slender fingers, tipped with nails painted the color of dried plums, reached out and picked up the small sculpture. She brought it close to her face, her eyes narrowing in the dimming light. "This pine," she whispered, her voice low and resonant. "It sings of splinters and sorrow." Wang glanced at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. My own eyebrows rose in response. Splinters and sorrow? What could that possibly mean? Was she referring to the quality of the wood? Perhaps a flaw invisible to the untrained eye? Or was it something more? My mind wandered to the strangeness of Joseon fortune-telling. I couldn't help but wonder if prophecies were ever divined from splinters floating in kimchi juice. It seemed unlikely, yet here we were. Wang cleared his throat, his voice a little shaky. "Honored madam," he began, "this piece is crafted from the finest pine, sourced from the royal forests themselves." He gestured vaguely towards the north, the direction of the mountains that shrouded the capital. "Its quality is impeccable." Huang's words held a nervous edge. He knew, as I did, the strict regulations surrounding the use of royal timber. The Royal Household Administration oversaw every aspect of major construction projects, from the selection of trees to the final placement of roof tiles. Only the most flawless timber was deemed fit for the palace, and even then, it underwent rigorous inspection. Kim Hye-gyong didn't respond immediately. She continued to turn the jade cicada over in her hands, her obsidian gaze fixed on the delicate pine branch. The silence stretched, taut with unspoken meaning. I knew from the way Huang's hands fidgeted with his sleeve that he was beginning to feel the pressure of her scrutiny. Finally, she placed the cicada back on the stall. Her eyes met Huang's, and a flicker of something unreadable passed between them. "The Royal Household Administration," she said, her voice smooth as polished jade, "holds great responsibility. It is their duty to ensure that only the finest materials reach the capital." Huang bobbed his head in fervent agreement. "Indeed. honored madam. Every piece of timber is carefully inspected by the officials before it is transported. A faint smile played on Kim Hye-kyung's lips. Is that so? She murmured. One hears whispers, however, whispers of shortcuts, of officials persuaded to overlook certain imperfections. Perhaps a knot here, a fissure there. Her gaze shifted to me, sharp and assessing. Not much has changed, it seems. My stomach tightened. Her words were laced with a subtle accusation, a hint of something darker lurking beneath the surface. Was she implying that Huang's wood was substandard? Or was she suggesting something far more sinister, a web of corruption that reached into the very heart of the royal household administration? I remembered a conversation I'd overheard between two palace carpenters, hushed whispers exchanged over cups of steaming tea. They spoke of certain trees, ancient and gnarled, that they believed contained spirits. These spirits, they claimed, could whisper prophecies, especially when the wood was fermented into a potent brew. They would consume this tea, seeking guidance from the whispers within. It sounded like the ramblings of superstitious old men, yet their conviction had been unsettling. Were these whispers, these prophecies of splinters and sorrow, what Kim Hye-kyung referred to? The air crackled with tension. Huang stammered, I assure you, honored madam, all my wood is. Kim Hye-kyung raised a hand, silencing him. Peace, she said, her voice softening. I merely observe. The wood, it speaks. One must simply listen. She placed a small pouch of coins on the stall, far exceeding the price of the cicada. Then, with a final, enigmatic look, she turned and melted into the gathering darkness, leaving Huang and me staring after her, lost in a sea of unanswered questions. The splinters, it seemed, had already begun to fly. The groaning started low, a deep rumble that vibrated through the packed earth of the marketplace. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the late afternoon sun, and saw it, the pine, lashed to a series of massive ox carts, its stripped trunk, a pale, vulnerable scar against the darkening sky. It began its slow, agonizing journey. Each rotation of the enormous wheels drew another mournful creak from the immense wood, a song of displacement and impending transformation. I shuddered, a sudden chill wrapping around me despite the lingering warmth of the day. Did someone just whisper about a pine cone levitating a few feet off the ground? I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and glanced around. The air shimmered slightly, the faces in the crowd blurring at the edges. It must be the fumes from that street vendor's roasted chestnuts. The sweet, smoky scent was undeniably potent. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. That pine, it felt wrong, almost as if it were resisting its fate. Kim Hye-kyung's words echoed in my mind, splinters and sorrow. I couldn't shake the feeling that this tree was somehow significant. I was almost tempted to follow, to see where it ended up, what purpose it would ultimately serve. It's no wonder such trees inspired such unease. Transporting a beam of that size from the forests to Hanyang, the capital, must have been a monumental undertaking. I can imagine the logistical nightmare. Specially constructed carts with reinforced axles, teams of oxen straining against the weight, the constant threat of breakage or slippage on the uneven roads. They would have had to plan multiple rest stops along the route, allowing the animals to recover and ensuring the precious cargo remained secure. Weeks, perhaps even months, on the road, exposed to the elements, vulnerable to bandits and unforeseen delays. Just thinking about it made my head spin. Or maybe that was the chestnuts again. Speaking of oxen, I overheard a rather interesting conversation between two merchants just now. Apparently, certain oxen, renowned for their strength and reliability, would absolutely refuse to budge when hitched to carts carrying particular trees. Cursed, they called them, claiming the wood was either possessed by malevolent spirits or simply radiated bad feng shui. One of the merchants swore he'd witnessed an ox collapse, trembling, as soon as the harness was secured, only to recover miraculously when a different tree was loaded onto the cart. Fascinating. Of course, this has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I appear to be seeing double now. I definitely need to sit down, and maybe step away from the chestnut vendor. The pine continued its slow procession, its creaks fading into the general din of the marketplace. The crowd dispersed, attention spans waning. drawn to brighter, more immediate distractions. But I remained, a strange sense of foreboding clinging to me. This tree, it felt like a harbinger of something. But what? The question of the pine's origins and the larger timber supply for the palace lingered in my mind. Where did these massive trees come from? Were they all harvested from royal forests, carefully managed and protected by the king's officials? Or were there private timber merchants, supplying the palace with wood from their own lands, perhaps even supplementing their income with less than legitimate acquisitions? I suspect some might have misplaced a few royal pines for personal use, blurring the lines between public and private property. The temptation to profit from such a valuable resource must have been enormous. And the opportunities for corruption? Well, let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if some officials turned a blind eye to a few missing trees in exchange for a share of the profits. The sheer volume of timber required for palace construction, repairs, and the creation of furniture, ships, and countless other necessities must have been staggering. Imagine the constant pressure on the royal forests, the delicate balance between supply and demand. The king would have needed a dedicated team of officials to oversee the entire process, from selecting suitable trees to ensuring their safe transport to the capital. And even then, I imagine there were shortages, delays, and disputes. A whole hidden world of timber politics, playing out beneath the surface of courtly life. This pine, it's just one tree, but it represents so much more. The intricate web of human ambition, the logistical challenges of a bygone era, the whispers of superstition, and the undeniable beauty of nature, all intertwined in its slow, mournful journey. I can't shake the feeling that I'm only glimpsing a small fragment of a much larger story, and something tells me it's a story worth pursuing, even if it means braving the fumes of roasted chestnuts and the unsettling sensation that pine cones are levitating. The pull is too strong to ignore. I need to know where this tree is going. I need to know its fate. The dust of the road clung to my bark, tasting of sweat and desperation. Hanyang. Finally. The city throbbed around me, a hive of noise and activity, the smells of grilling meat and fermenting kimchi fighting for dominance in the air. But I wasn't interested in the street food, no matter how tempting. My hunger was of a different kind. A hunger for the rich, resinous scent of freshly hewn pine, for the bite of the saw, for the satisfying thud of hammer against wood, a hunger for the embrace of the palace walls. Someone just tried to pay for rice cakes with a poem about the fleeting nature of existence. Honestly, people. I'd heard whispers of such eccentricities on the road, but witnessing it firsthand, it's enough to make a seasoned timber sigh. I've seen squirrels with more practical sense. My roots ached, my needles drooped. The long journey had taken its toll. Yet, as I lumbered closer, the palace walls, those immense, hungry ramparts, loomed larger, pulling me forward like a moth to a flickering lantern. They were scarred and weathered, but in their imposing presence, I sensed a promise of renewal. New beams, strong and vibrant, ready to shoulder the weight of history. My purpose. And there, near the throng of bustling workers, stood Kim Hayegyong. She was a shadow against the vibrant tapestry of the city, yet my wooden heart recognized her instantly. Her gaze met mine, holding for a moment longer than necessary. It was a complex look, difficult to decipher. Was it satisfaction at seeing me finally arrive, pity for my weary state, or perhaps anticipation? I couldn't be sure. The palace gates yawned open, revealing a controlled chaos within. Thousands of bodies swarmed like ants, each with their designated task. Carpenters, their arms corded with muscle, wrestled massive beams into place. Roof tilers, nimble and sure-footed, danced across the scaffolding. The air thrummed with the rhythm of hammers, the rasp of saws, the shouts of men coordinating their efforts. A grand symphony of construction. It would take years, they said, to complete this phase of the renovation. Years of sweat, toil, and unwavering dedication. Years that I would be a part of. A sudden image flashed in my mind. A group of workers huddled around a freshly dug foundation pit. They weren't laying stones, though. They were burying something. Small, white, gleaming. Jade shards. One of them muttered something about appeasing the earth spirits. Another about keeping the rats away. I blinked, the vision fading. Hallucination. It must be. The long journey, the dust, the sheer absurdity of it all. I chalked it up to fatigue. Even the most fantastical rumors couldn't distract from the more pressing question. What did these laborers receive for their backbreaking work? The whispers on the wind painted conflicting pictures. Some spoke of regular wages, carefully measured copper coins clinking in calloused hands. Others claimed that compensation came in the form of rice rations, enough to feed a family if one was frugal. And then there were the darker whispers, the ones that spoke of promises, not of reward, but of the absence of punishment, a guarantee that no one would pull out their fingernails if a beam was placed incorrectly, or a tile shattered. I shuddered, the image vivid and unsettling. It was a stark reminder of the precarious nature of life for those at the bottom rung of the ladder. Their lives, their livelihoods, their very fingernails, dependent on the whims of those in power. As I was finally maneuvered into position, ready to begin my new life as a supporting beam, I couldn't shake the image of those jade shards. Superstition or not, they represented something important. A desperate hope, perhaps, for a bit of luck. A touch of divine intervention in a world that often seemed indifferent to their suffering. The weight of the palace settled upon me, a familiar pressure. The scent of pine filled the air, sharp and invigorating. I closed my metaphorical eyes, drawing strength from the earth below and the sky above. My years in the forest had prepared me for this. I was ready to bear the burden, to stand tall, to become a part of something greater than myself. Ready to become a part of Hanyang's hungry walls. And maybe, just maybe, keep the rats away. The pine beams groaned, a deep, resonating sound that vibrated through the very ground I stood on. Each massive length of timber, hoisted into place with a system of ropes and pulleys, seemed to protest its new purpose, its forced transition from forest giant to architectural skeleton. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the skeletal frame, illuminating the strained ropes and the glistening sweat on the laborers' brows. They moved with an almost choreographed precision, their calls and grunts forming a strange rhythmic counterpoint to the creaking wood. The sheer scale of the undertaking was breathtaking, a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. Because, let's be honest, this whole palace felt like a monument to someone's incredibly stubborn will. Kim Hye-kyung was still there, a smudge of darkness against the lighter wood. She hadn't moved from her spot near the scaffolding, a silent observer like myself. I strained to hear what she was murmuring, but the wind, the creaking, the rhythmic chants of the workers, all conspired to keep her words just out of reach. Or maybe it was just my stomach. I really should have grabbed a rice cake before coming out here. This whole palace, it unsettles me. I know the basics, of course. Royal palaces were designed according to principles of feng shui, carefully positioned to harmonize with the surrounding landscape. Mountains to the north, water to the south, all that jazz. This place, however, felt off, like the landscape had been bullied into submission rather than embraced. The energy here wasn't harmonious. It was oppressive, almost sinister, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. A flutter of white caught my eye. High above, perched precariously on a newly placed beam, a small bird relieved itself. A splatter of white landed squarely in the center of the wood. A ripple of murmurs went through the workers below. A good omen, they whispered. A sign of luck. I remembered reading somewhere that bird droppings during a beam-raising ceremony were considered particularly auspicious. Something about the bird choosing that specific spot, blessing the structure. Unless it was a certain type of albino crow. Then, apparently, it was an omen of doom. I squinted. Definitely not a crow. Probably. And is that a Asterix chicken playing a Asterix lute? I blinked. It was gone. I must be hallucinating. Stress-induced avian musical interludes. That's a thing, right? The whole process of raising these beams, of constructing something so monumental, raises all sorts of questions. For instance, did every project have a designated master carpenter, a single visionary guiding the construction? Or was it more of a committee affair? I can only imagine the bureaucratic infighting that must have taken place. The west wing roof tiles should be glazed terracotta, not slate. It clashes with the emperor's favorite robe. But slate is more durable. Durability is less important than aesthetically pleasing His Imperial Majesty. Yeah, things could get ugly, and potentially fatal, if you manage to offend the wrong official. Probably best not to dwell on that. The rhythmic creaking continued, the ropes straining under the weight of another enormous beam. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the construction site. I watched, mesmerized, as the skeletal frame slowly began to take shape, a growing monument to human ambition and possibly madness. The whispers of Kim Hye-gyong continued, a persistent, unsettling undercurrent to the symphony of construction. I still couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was a warning. I could feel it in my bones. Months later, walking through the newly renovated West Wing, I stopped dead. There it was, a hairline fracture snaking its way down one of the freshly raised pine beams. A splinter of sorrow, just as that cryptic Kim Hye-gyong had predicted. A splinter of sorrow. Is that poetic? Or just weird? I mean, it's just a crack in a beam. Although, now that I'm staring at it, it does seem to emanate a certain melancholy. I touched the rough wood, tracing the crack with my fingertip. It felt wrong. More than just a structural flaw, it felt intentional. And then I remembered what Minister Park had said, muttering under his breath about how some of the lumber hadn't seemed up to par. He'd been overruled, of course, by the beaming, ironically, Lord Kang, who was all too eager to showcase the swift completion of the renovations. Swift and shoddy, perhaps? This whole thing brought to mind something I'd read about palace construction during the Joseon era. Structural failures weren't exactly uncommon. Earthquakes, sure, those were a given. But also, let's be honest, sometimes things were just built poorly. Corners cut, materials substituted, bribes exchanged, the usual. This crack, though, this one felt different. It felt pointed, like a whispered accusation in a crowded room. Sabotage. The word hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I found myself thinking about that conversation with the old carpenter, the one with the calloused hands and the knowing eyes. He'd mentioned some old folk remedy for fixing cracks in wood, a paste made from crushed jade and oxblood. Crushed jade and oxblood. Seriously? Assuming you could even convince an ox to donate some blood. Those beasts are surprisingly opinionated. I'd once tried to reason with one about moving a cart a few feet. It just stared at me, chewing its cud like I was the dumbest creature on earth. Which, considering I was contemplating rubbing ox blood on a cracked beam, maybe I was. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts about absurd remedies, I heard it. That faint, almost ethereal melody. The lute-playing chicken. I swear that bird is following me. I glanced around, half expecting to see it perched on a rafter, serenading the cracked beam. No chicken. Just the unsettling silence and the growing suspicion that this splinter of sorrow was more than just a simple structural flaw. The implications of this crack were far-reaching. If this beam was compromised, how many others were? The entire West Wing could be unstable. And what about the other renovations? Had Lord Kang's haste and eagerness to please the king blinded him to potential problems elsewhere? Or worse, had he actively encouraged them? I knew I had to bring this to someone's attention. But who? The king? He was already stressed enough with the ongoing border disputes. Telling him about a potentially catastrophic structural failure in his newly renovated palace wing probably wouldn't be the best way to start his day. And then there was the risk of being seen as an alarmist, or worse, a troublemaker. The historical precedents weren't exactly encouraging. From what I'd read, how these kinds of failures were handled varied wildly. Sometimes repairs were made swiftly and efficiently, with a genuine concern for the safety and well-being of the palace occupants. Other times, well, let's just say some officials saw such incidents as an opportunity to siphon off funds meant for repairs, lining their own pockets while leaving the palace vulnerable. Some things never change, do they? The memory of another story surfaced, the collapse of a section of the Royal Library a few decades back. The official inquiry pointed to substandard materials, but whispers persisted of embezzlement and bribery. The official in charge of the renovations had mysteriously acquired a sizable estate shortly after the incident. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in the world of palace intrigue, coincidences were rare. This whole situation felt like a delicate dance on a crumbling floor. One wrong step, and the whole thing could come crashing down. I needed to tread carefully. I needed proof, something concrete to back up my suspicions. Just saying, hey, I saw a crack and I think Lord Kang is corrupt, probably wouldn't get me very far. It might even get me labeled as the crazy foreigner who talks to chickens. So, where to start? I needed to find someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't dismiss my concerns, or, worse, use them to their own advantage. Someone who understood the intricacies of palace politics and knew how to navigate the treacherous currents of court life. The image of the cracked beam kept flashing in my mind, a splinter of sorrow. Maybe Kim Hye-gyong was right. Maybe this wasn't just about a cracked beam. Maybe it was a crack in something much bigger, something fundamental. A crack in the foundation itself. The air in the palace was thick, suffocating, not with the usual summer humidity, but with something far more insidious. Whispers. They slithered through the corridors, clung to the silk robes of court officials, and echoed in the empty courtyards. Whispers of treason. Whispers of plots against the throne. Whispers that pointed, like accusing fingers, at unseen enemies. And then there was the crack. A hairline fracture, barely visible to the naked eye, snaking its way across one of the main supporting beams in the king's audience chamber. More than just a structural flaw, it had become a symbol, a portent of the instability threatening to tear the kingdom apart. A physical manifestation of the whispers that plagued the palace. It seemed to scream, in silent splintering wood, that the very foundations of Joseon were cracking under the strain. Did you know some Joseon officials believed misfortune could be averted by wearing underwear inside out? Or maybe that's just me. Regardless of underwear orientation, the crack in the beam was undeniable. Accusations of treason and factionalism, of course, were as common in the Joseon dynasty as elaborate headwear and complicated bowing rituals. Such accusations often led to purges, executions, and presumably quite a lot of lost laundry, as officials scrambled to hide evidence, burn incriminating letters, and, maybe, just maybe, turn their underwear inside out. Fact. Court records are filled with accounts of these power struggles, painting a vivid, if somewhat grim, picture of the political landscape. One minute you're enjoying a nice cup of ginseng tea, the next you're being accused of plotting with the northern barbarians, all because you disagreed about the proper way to prepare rice cakes. The whispers intensified, swirling around a particular incident, a missing document, a clandestine meeting, a misinterpreted gesture. Each faction within the court pointed fingers at the others, each claiming innocence while subtly, or not so subtly, implicating their rivals. The king, a man burdened by the weight of his crown, was forced to navigate this treacherous terrain. He paced the royal apartments, the floorboards groaning beneath his restless steps, his brow furrowed in concentration. The crack in the beam seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of the fragility of his power. Now, about those jade amulets, a quirky little tidbit for you. Some officials, convinced that their political rivals were resorting to more than just whispers and innuendo, believed that carrying a jade amulet shaped like a specific type of mushroom, or possibly a turnip, sources differ on this crucial detail, protected them from evil spirits and the machinations of their enemies. And if that failed, there were always hallucinogenic teas, a less documented but highly suspected method of dealing with the stresses of court life. Imagine the royal physician trying to explain that one away. Your Majesty, the Minister of Rights isn't plotting treason. He's just exploring the spiritual properties of fermented chrysanthemum. The debate raged, not just within the hushed confines of the palace, but also among scholars and historians even now, centuries later. Was the king always directly involved in investigating such matters of treason? Or were some cases handled discreetly, perhaps even ruthlessly, by palace officials operating in the shadows? The official records, naturally, paint a picture of a wise and just ruler, personally overseeing every investigation, ensuring fairness, and upholding the law. But the whispers tell a different story. A story of backroom deals, silenced witnesses, and convenient disappearances. Presumably, certain officials had a vested interest in silencing certain rumors. Rumors that might, for instance, expose their own shady dealings, their own whispered plots and secret alliances. It was a dangerous game, this dance of whispers and accusations, where one wrong step could lead to ruin. One misplaced word, One misinterpreted glance could be enough to send a man tumbling into the abyss. The king summoned his advisors, men he both trusted and feared. Each one approached the throne with a carefully crafted mask of loyalty, their eyes darting nervously towards the ominous crack in the beam. The air crackled with tension, thick with unspoken accusations and veiled threats. The king listened patiently, weighing their words, searching for the truth beneath the layers of political maneuvering. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the whispers were more than just idle gossip. They were a symptom of a deeper malaise, a rot that was slowly eating away at the heart of his kingdom. He had to act, and act decisively. But how? Whom could he trust? The whispers had poisoned the well, leaving him surrounded by doubt and suspicion. He looked at the faces of his advisors, searching for a flicker of honesty, a glimmer of genuine concern. He saw fear. He saw ambition. He saw the reflection of the crack in the beam in their carefully polished eyes. And in that moment he knew that he was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. The whispers continued, swirling around him like a suffocating shroud. The fate of the kingdom hung in the balance, suspended precariously between truth and lies, between loyalty and betrayal. The crack in the beam seemed to grow wider, a silent promise of the chaos that was yet to come. The dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, illuminating the hairline fracture snaking across the main support beam of the queen's pavilion. And there she was, Kim Hye-gyong, bathed in that ethereal light, a chillingly serene smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of surprise, not a smile of fear. It was the smile of a puppeteer who just successfully cut the strings. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. She hadn't just predicted hurt the crack, she'd orchestrated hurt it. My mind raced, piecing together the seemingly innocuous events of the past few weeks. The spilled tea that weakened the wood, the strategically placed heavy chests, the seemingly accidental bumps and jostles during the last court gathering. It was a subtle form of protest, wouldn't you say? Or just passive-aggressive DIY. Either way, it was a bold move, a dangerous game played beneath the veneer of polite smiles and demure bows. One wrong step and, well, let's just say the consequences wouldn't be a sternly worded letter from the palace etiquette advisor. This wasn't entirely unexpected. Court intrigues and power struggles were a constant feature of Joseon politics, often playing out in coded language and symbolic gestures. A misplaced hairpin, a particular shade of embroidery on a robe, even the arrangement of flowers in a vase could carry a hidden message, a veiled threat, a silent declaration of war. It was a world of whispers and shadows, where the truth was a carefully crafted illusion and survival depended on the ability to read between the lines. And Kim Hye-gyong, it seemed, was a master of this intricate, dangerous language. Her seemingly fragile demeanor masked a sharp intellect and a will of iron. She was playing a game as old as the palace walls themselves, a game of whispers and waiting, of nudges and manipulations. Speaking of whispers, I recall a particularly quirky tidbit I overheard from the kitchen maids gossiping by the well. Apparently, some of the court ladies used fans with hidden compartments to pass messages. Everything from love letters and recipes for hallucinogenic kimchi. Yes, you read that right. Hallucinogenic kimchi. Apparently, the royal court wasn't always as stuffy as the history books make it out to be, to accusations of poisoning and veiled threats against rivals. Imagine the chaos that could unfold with a strategically placed fan and a well-timed breeze. A misplaced love letter could ruin a reputation, a whispered recipe could topple a dynasty, and a single accusation could send someone to the executioner's block. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Were women ever directly involved in political plots, or were they always pawns in men's games of power? The official histories, written by men of course, paint a picture of demure, obedient women, content to embroider and gossip, while the men made all the important decisions. But I suspect the reality was far more complex. One suspects some women were quite adept at pulling strings from behind the silk curtains, manipulating events with a subtlety and finesse that would make even the most seasoned courtier envious. And think about it. Confined within the palace walls with limited formal power, women had to find other ways to exert their influence. They became masters of the subtle arts, weaving intricate webs of alliances and rivalries, using whispered words and symbolic gestures to achieve their aims. They were the keepers of secrets, the confidants of queens and concubines, the silent observers who saw and heard everything. And in a world where information was power, they held a significant, albeit often unacknowledged, influence. Kim Hye-kyung, with her cracked beam and her chilling smile, was a perfect example. She hadn't stormed the throne room or challenged the king's authority directly. She had chosen a more subtle, more insidious approach. She had used the very structure of the palace, the very symbol of royal power, to make her point. And in doing so, she had sent a clear message to anyone who dared to underestimate her. This incident, seemingly insignificant on the surface, raised a whole host of questions. What was the true extent of Kim Hye-kyung's influence? What was her endgame? And, perhaps most importantly, what were the implications for the delicate balance of power within the court? The crack in the beam was more than just a structural flaw. It was a crack in the facade of royal authority, a symbol of the simmering tensions and hidden power struggles that threatened to erupt at any moment. And Kim Hye-kyung, with her enigmatic smile, stood at the epicenter of it all. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than ever. One could only watch and wait with bated breath to see what move she would make next, and pray that you weren't caught in the crossfire when the dust finally settled. Kim Hye-kyung felt hands clamp down on her shoulders, rough and insistent. The marketplace buzz, usually a comforting hum, warped into a dizzying roar. Her basket of herbs clattered to the cobblestones, ginseng roots scattering like fallen stars against the gray stones. She twisted, trying to see who dared interrupt her haggling with Old Man Park over the price of ginger. It wasn't Old Man Park. It was two royal guards, faces grim, eyes like chips of ice. "Kim Hye-kyung," one of them barked, his voice cutting through the sudden hush that had fallen over the marketplace. "You are under arrest for treason against the crown." Treason? Hye-kyung's heart hammered against her ribs. Treason? What madness was this? Treason? She repeated, the word a strangled whisper. I've done nothing, the other guard scoffed. Silence. You'll have your chance to speak before the magistrates. Though, he added, a cruel smirk twisting his lips, I doubt it will do you much good. They dragged her through the parting crowd, their grip tightening with each gasp of protest she managed. She saw faces, a mixture of fear, pity, and morbid curiosity. Old Man Park stared, his mouth agape, a forgotten ginger root clutched in his hand. Hye-kyung's mind raced. Treason? It couldn't be about the crack in the sky, could it? It was a natural phenomenon, an act of the heavens, not something she had caused. Then it struck her. It wasn't about the crack itself. It was about the whispers, the growing unease, the murmurings of dissent it had ignited. The king, it seemed, was blaming her, the shaman, the seer, for the fear that had taken root in his kingdom. The guards shoved her into a waiting cart, the rough wood digging into her back. As they rattled away, she caught a glimpse of a young boy picking up a stray strand of her hair, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. She remembered her grandmother's stories, the whispers about the lingering spirit in a person's hair after death. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Would someone collect her hair, brew it into a tea to remember her by, or perhaps to glean some insight into the whispers of dissent, the murmurs of a kingdom on the brink? The journey to the magistrate's court was a blur. Hye-kyung was thrown into a cold, damp cell, the heavy wooden door slamming shut with a resounding thud that echoed the finality of her situation. She huddled on the straw-covered floor, the chills seeping into her bones. Her mind replayed the events of the past few days, searching for some clue, some understanding of how she had ended up here. She had only spoken the truth, the visions the spirits had shown her. Was that treason? To speak the truth? The Joseon legal system, as Hye-kyung understood it, was a tangled web of tradition, royal decree, and often arbitrary whim. Was there a formal process for accusations of treason? She recalled stories of exiles to remote islands, of swift executions for those who dared to challenge the king's authority. Some whispered that sentences were often decided long before the trial even began, influenced by courtly intrigues and political maneuvering. Were the whispers about her, the accusations of treason, based on actual evidence, or merely the whispers and rumors that had spiraled out of control in the wake of the celestial crack. She wondered who her accusers were. Was it the court officials, eager to find a scapegoat for the growing unrest? Or was it the king himself, paranoid and desperate to cling to power? Perhaps it was someone closer, someone she had trusted, who had twisted her words, misinterpreted her visions to serve their own ends. The hours dragged on, punctuated only by the changing of the guards and the occasional clanging of metal from somewhere deep within the prison. The dampness clung to her like a shroud, the silence pressing down on her with an almost physical weight. She thought of her grandmother, her teachings, the whispered secrets of the spirits. Had she been wrong to share them? Had her gift become her curse? Finally, the heavy door creaked open, and a guard beckoned her to follow. Her legs felt stiff and unsteady as she rose, the straw clinging to her clothes like whispers of her impending fate. She was led through a maze of corridors, the air thick with the smell of incense and fear. She emerged into a large hall dimly lit by flickering torches. At the far end, seated upon a raised platform, was the magistrate, his face obscured by shadows. Hye-kyung's heart sank. The proceedings that followed were a blur of accusations and denials. The magistrate listened impassively as the guards recounted the whispers circulating in the marketplace, the fear and unrest that had gripped the kingdom since the appearance of the crack in the sky. They presented no real evidence, only the vague accusations of spreading dissent, of sowing fear among the people. Hye-kyung tried to defend herself, to explain that she had only spoken the truth, the visions the spirits had shown her. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The magistrate's expression remained unchanged, his eyes cold and distant. As the proceedings drew to a close, a chilling realization washed over Hye-kyung. It didn't matter whether she was guilty or innocent, the decision had already been made. The trial was merely a formality, a performance for the sake of appearances. The king needed someone to blame, and she, the shaman, the seer, was the perfect scapegoat. Her fate, it seemed, was sealed. The price of prophecy, she realized with a bitter pang, was far higher than she had ever imagined. The whispers of the spirits, once a source of comfort and guidance, had now become the chains that bound her. The pine beam, still cracked, a splinter of truth embedded in the heart of the palace, stood as a silent witness. A stark, jagged line, marring the otherwise smooth, polished wood. It was a physical manifestation of Kim Hye-kyung's defiance. Sunlight, filtering through the high lattice windows, caught the edges of the fissure, illuminating the imperfection in the otherwise flawless facade of royal power. This palace, with its ornate gilding and meticulously crafted gardens, radiated an unsettling aura, a constant hum of tension beneath the surface of serene elegance. It wasn't just the recent events, the whispers of conspiracy and the palpable fear clinging to the air like a shroud. No, this place had always felt off. The Joseon dynasty placed great symbolic importance on architecture. Temples, designed to reflect the cosmic order, palaces embodying royal authority, even the humblest homes adhering to principles of harmony and balance. Every structure told a story, whispered secrets of tradition and belief. But this palace, despite its outward grandeur, seemed to have absorbed a darkness, a weight of history, etched into its very foundations. Perhaps it was the sheer number of intrigues that had unfolded within these walls, the countless betrayals and power struggles played out under the watchful gaze of painted dragons and stoic guardians. Or perhaps, as some whispered, it was something more, something inherent in the very materials that shaped this imposing edifice. The belief that certain woods could absorb negative energy was prevalent during the Joseon period. Specific trees, believed to possess purifying properties, were often planted around cemeteries, their roots drawing down the restless spirits of the departed. Amulets carved from particular woods were worn for protection, warding off evil influences and misfortune. One could imagine, then, the quiet unease surrounding the damaged beam. More than just a structural flaw, it represented a rupture in the carefully constructed balance of the palace, a physical manifestation of the discord that threatened to unravel the delicate threads of courtly life. Did the wood, chosen for its supposed strength and resilience, now hold captive the malevolent energies unleashed by the attempted assassination? The question of the beam's fate became a subject of hushed debate within the palace walls. Was it ever replaced, erased from sight, as if the act it symbolized could be so easily forgotten? Or did it remain, a constant nagging reminder of the plot, a physical scar on the face of royal authority? The practicalities of repair, the sourcing of a suitable replacement, the disruption to the daily routines of the court, all were valid concerns. Yet, underlying these logistical considerations lay a deeper, more insidious motive. One could easily imagine the whispers in the dimly lit corridors of power, the clandestine meetings between officials, the rustling of silk robes concealing hands exchanging coin. The cost, Your Excellency, is exorbitant. Such a rare and ancient pine, the transport alone, eyes would meet, a silent understanding passing between them. The repair funds, conveniently diverted, would line the pockets of those tasked with overseeing the restoration. The damaged beam, a symbol of defiance, would also become a symbol of corruption, a testament to the greed that festered within the heart of the court. Perhaps a new beam was eventually installed, pristine and unmarked, a carefully crafted replica designed to erase the memory of the incident. But the knowledge of the original, the cracked and scarred witness, would remain. It would linger in the minds of those who knew the truth, a silent accusation echoing through the grand halls of the palace. Every creak of the timbers, every rustle of the wind through the eaves, would carry the faintest whisper of Kim Hye-gyung's name, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed facade could be shattered by a single act of courage. And even if the beam remained, its presence wouldn't necessarily be a testament to justice or remembrance. It could become a trophy of a different sort, a morbid reminder of the power wielded by those who controlled the narrative. A cautionary tale, whispered to those who dared to challenge the established order. See what happens to those who defy us? Their memory becomes a blemish, a flaw in the otherwise perfect tapestry of our reign. The silent testimony of the pine, then, would be open to interpretation, a mirror reflecting the desires and fears of those who gazed upon it. A symbol, not of truth, but of the malleability of history itself. Years later, you run your fingers along the crack in the beam, now smoothed by time and dust, but still whispering Kim Hye-gyung's story. A story not of treason, but of a different kind of prophecy. One carved not in stone, but in the heart of a giant pine felled for a palace that never truly understood its silent tongues. You linger on the smooth curve of the wood, the faint ridges a ghostly reminder of the saw's relentless teeth. The years have softened the edges, muted the raw scream of the felled tree, yet the echo of its life, its final, defiant act, persists. It whispers to you now, a language not of words, but of texture and scent, of the subtle give beneath your fingertips. You close your eyes, the scent of pine, faint but persistent, intertwining with a deeper, almost imperceptible aroma of sorrow, fading into the night. Or is that just the chamomile tea steaming on the table beside you? The gentle warmth of the mug against your palm grounds you in the present, yet the whisper of the wood pulls you back through the centuries, into the heart of a story etched in the very grain of existence. Wood from old palaces, they say, was sometimes reused in later construction, carrying with it the weight of history. Stories not just of kings and queens, their grand pronouncements and lavish ceremonies, but of the whispers and shadows that danced in the corridors of power. The stories of the unseen hands that built those palaces, the aching backs and calloused fingers, the quiet acts of defiance, the dreams dreamt beneath the indifferent gaze of the moon, the fears whispered in the hushed darkness of shared sleeping quarters. Each plank, each beam, a silent witness to the human drama that unfolded within those walls, a repository of the hopes and sorrows, the triumphs and tragedies of the Joseon world. This particular beam, you suspect, held more than most. It held the essence of Kim Hye-gyung's spirit, her unspoken prophecy woven into the very fiber of the wood, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The weight of that history settles on you, a tangible presence in the quiet room. Some believed, and perhaps still believe, that the spirits of those who worked on a building lingered within its walls, trapped within the very structure they helped to create. It was a common belief, whispered in hushed tones around flickering oil lamps, a way to explain the creaks and groans of aging timber, the drafts that snaked through the grand halls, the inexplicable chills that sometimes ran down one's spine in the dead of night. Which is why, of course, some palaces were rumored to be haunted, or at least filled with whispers of forgotten songs, the rustling of silk skirts long since turned to dust, the clinking of jade ornaments lost in the passage of time, or perhaps, more prosaically, the lingering scent of ox blood cocktails consumed by weary laborers seeking solace at the end of a long day. The line between the mundane and the supernatural, in those days, was often blurred, a tapestry woven from equal parts reality and imagination. The question remains, though, were such stories preserved in official records, meticulously transcribed by court scribes onto parchment scrolls, carefully archived for posterity? Or did they exist solely in the realm of folk tales and whispers, passed down through generations, like precious heirlooms, their truth burnished and reshaped by the passage of time and the vagaries of memory? One suspects some truths, the uncomfortable truths, the inconvenient truths, the truths that challenged the official narrative, were more potent, more resonant, more deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness, when spoken in the dark, under the cloak of anonymity, away from the prying ears of those in power. The official records might speak of kings and queens, of battles won and lost, of treaties signed and broken, but they rarely, if ever, captured the true heartbeat of the people, the hopes and fears, the dreams and desires that fueled the engine of history. The wind sighs through the palace eaves, a mournful melody carried on the night air, a lullaby of history, a whispered invitation to surrender to the embrace of slumber. Sleep now, the whispers of the Joseon, the echoes of lives lived and lost, the secrets held within the heart of the wood, fading into dreams, the scent of pine and chamomile mingling in the stillness, a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that history is not just something we read about in books, but something we carry within us, etched in our bones, woven into the very fabric of our being. And as you drift off to sleep, the whispers of the Joseon, carried on the wind, on the scent of ancient wood, become the whispers of your own dreams, a seamless tapestry woven from the threads of history and the whispers of your own heart.